This plain behind me is where the legendary leader Hannibal hurled the army of Carthage against the might of Rome in 216 BC. I'm Matthew Settle. Over 100,000 men fought in a battle to the death. Over half of them died here in Cannae.
Hoje esta terra faz parte da Puglia, no sul da Itália. É difícil imaginar como deve ter sido. Mas agora, com nova tecnologia de videogame, você verá essa grande batalha como nunca antes. O vasto número de soldados, a formação das tropas, como eles lutaram e como a batalha foi vencida. O panorama que os generais queriam ter tido, agora, em batalhas decisivas. Batalhas decisivas.
This is all that remains of the Roman town of Cannae. But 2,000 years ago, these fields saw Rome's mighty legions battle against one of the greatest military minds in history, Hannibal, commander of the armies of the great trading city of Carthage.
Em 250 a.C., Roma dominava toda a Itália. Agora desejava o controle do mar Mediterrâneo. Mas a rica cidade de Cartago, no norte da África, era obstáculo à sua ambição.
The problem wasn't that the Mediterranean was too small for two rival powers, but the problem was that Carthage had designs on Sicily and Spain, and Rome had designs on North Africa.
Por 24 anos, as duas potências batalharam pelo controle da Sicília. Cartago foi derrotada e Roma impôs termos abusivos para a paz.
Hamilcar, the Carthaginian general in Sicily, was furious. As sacrifices were being made to the gods, he brought his 9-year-old son to the altar and made him swear an oath, never to be a friend to the Romans. That young boy was Hannibal, and he never forgot his promise.
When Hamilcar died, power passed first of all to his son-in-law, Hasdrubal, and then when Hasdrubal himself was assassinated, it passed to his son, Hannibal.
Carthage is now in debt. It's got to pay the Romans off money every year. It's lost a lot of its territory, so they decide to create a very solid, very wealthy province in Spain, and also a very strong army.
Rome was worried by the recovery of Carthage and was just waiting for an excuse to strike again at its old enemy. When Hannibal attacked a Spanish city loyal to Rome, they saw the perfect excuse to go to war. But Hannibal decided to attack first.
Hannibal works out that the only way to defeat Rome is to go right to the center, to go to Rome itself, go to Italy, and beat the Romans there.
Hannibal's strategy is one of the clearest cases in history of attack being the best form of defense.
Em 218 a.C., Aníbal iniciou sua marcha através da Espanha com um exército de 100.000 homens e 37 elefantes. Ele fez então o impensável. Cruzou os Alpes rumo à Itália em pleno inverno.
Hannibal is an immensely charismatic leader. Hannibal could get armies to do things that most men simply couldn't have dreamed of. Somehow an army with Hannibal in command could go that little bit further.
He was still a young man, only in his 20s, but his hatred of Rome drove him and his army onwards.
Os romanos tiveram uma amostra da força de Aníbal na Batalha de Trébia. Agora, graças à nova tecnologia de videogame, veremos Aníbal em ação como nunca antes.
The importance of elephants shouldn't be underestimated. They were never used as pack animals, they were only used as weapons. And they were very important for his image. We know of coins that we still have, in fact, coins with the image of Hannibal on the one side and an elephant on the other.
As legiões romanas foram esmagadas por Aníbal e seus elefantes de guerra. No ano seguinte foi a mesma história. Roma enviou outro exército e sofreu outra derrota no lago Trasímeno. Parecia que nada podia deter Aníbal.
His army rolled on south, through Italy, and rested here on the Adriatic Sea. Hannibal was now less than 100 miles from Rome. He had already killed or wounded 100,000 legionaries. In desperation, the Romans decided to gamble everything on one great battle.
Eles destacaram 8 legiões, 70.000 homens.
The Romans decided that they were going to go for broke. They were going to create a massive army, twice as big as anything that had faced Hannibal before, and simply smash him.
Em 2 de agosto de 216 a.C., o colossal exército romano enfrentou Aníbal aqui, perto da cidade de Canas. Seria o gênio de Aníbal contra todas as desvantagens. Seria a batalha mais sangrenta que o mundo antigo já vira.
But then the fields were uncultivated and home to the two most powerful and different armies of the ancient world.
O que estava em jogo era o controle do Mediterrâneo e o futuro de Roma. Vamos dar uma olhada no imenso exército romano que enfrentou Aníbal. Ele continha 8 legiões. Cada uma possuía 5.000 homens, dispostos em 3 linhas, por sua vez divididas em quadrados de infantaria. Essa formação de tabuleiro de damas visava o máximo de flexibilidade, mas era difícil de manobrar no calor da batalha e requeria um comandante muito experiente para fazê-la funcionar.
As a Roman soldier, just where you stood in these 3 lines was based on your age and your experience. If you were around 17 to 25, you would take up position right here in the front rank. Here you would be in the thick of the action. As a raw recruit, you would become battle-hardened or die. If you survived to your mid-20s, then you would graduate to the second rank of experienced men at the peak of fighting fitness. And if you lived to be a grisly old veteran, you would find a home here in the third rank. Maybe you wouldn't be so quick anymore, but all that knowledge and experience would help get the army out of a tight spot.
Vamos ver o que Aníbal e seu exército teriam visto. Os escaramuçadores agiam como uma cortina, tornando difícil perceber como as tropas romanas estavam organizadas ou quantas eram. E podemos ver que o exército de Aníbal em nada se parecia com a máquina bélica romana do outro lado do campo de batalha. Este é um exército recrutado de vários países. Da África vinham os lanceiros líbios e a cavalaria númida em velozes pequenos cavalos. Havia gauleses da França e espanhóis, montados ou a pé. Aqui, Aníbal tinha a vantagem de 10.000 cavaleiros contra os 6.000 de Roma, e a planície de Canas era perfeita para a cavalaria. Mas ele tinha somente 40.000 infantes contra os 70.000 de Roma. O exército romano era tão vasto que tinha 2 comandantes, Paulo e Varro. Eles lideravam o exército em dias alternados.
Now this is tricky enough if both commanders had the same strategy. But they didn't. They had competing strategies. Paulus favored a cautious approach and did not want to rush into battle. Varro was spoiling for a fight and wanted to force the battle onto the open plain where the huge Roman army had room to maneuver.
2 de agosto de 216 a.C. foi o dia de Varro comandar. O exército romano posicionou-se para a batalha. Como de costume, a infantaria ocupou o centro, com destacamentos de cavalaria nas 2 alas para guardar os flancos. Não sabemos o que se passava na mente de Varro, mas ele decidiu mudar a ordem de batalha normal. Ele ordenou que os escalões se agrupassem mais. Haveria menos lacunas e pouca chance de mudar a formação.
Either through great wisdom or utter folly, the consuls had agreed to stack the legions to create depth and shock with the idea they could just burst through the Carthaginian army. They had given up flexibility in exchange for power.
Aníbal idealizou uma armadilha. Ele dispôs suas tropas gaulesas e espanholas em uma formação de crescente, curvada para fora, na direção das linhas romanas. Parecia convidar a um ataque contra suas forças em menor número.
Even his own soldiers must have wondered what he was up to. He had placed himself at the most vulnerable part of the line, at the center where the fighting would be fiercest.
They had to hold the advance of this huge Roman steamroller. He was there to encourage what he knew to be the weakest part of his line.
To some extent, he may have been appealing to the sort of emotional, the warrior culture of the Gauls in particular, who made up a lot of these units. This was a culture in which you were supposed to excel, do the spectacular, to stand out in front.
Estranhamente, Aníbal deixara suas melhores tropas, os lanceiros líbios, de reserva nos flancos de seu exército. Mas Aníbal sabia exatamente o que estava fazendo. Ele tinha um plano.
Almost 130,000 men and 16,000 horses were squeezed into this battlefield just over 2 miles square, beginning where the tree line marks the river, and ending here at the hill of Cannae.
Subitamente, o movimento irrompeu. Os escaramuçadores avançaram. As legiões também, no mesmo passo. Os cartagineses, em muito menor número, prepararam-se para o impacto. A Batalha de Canas começou.
Hannibal sent his heavy cavalry straight for the Roman horsemen under Paulus.
A luta foi intensa e brutal. Enquanto isso, a cavalaria númida de Aníbal atacou a ala esquerda romana de Varro. Com a cavalaria em combate, as 8 legiões de infantaria romana seguiram rumo à posição de Aníbal. Chegando a 13 metros, cada legionário arremessava sua lança. Então, sacavam o gládio, a pequena espada de endurecido aço espanhol, e investiam contra o crescente cartaginês.
This is a replica gladius and shield. The shield was used for battering an opponent, quickly followed by a thrust. The shield alone weighs 22 pounds. So, in this heat with that sun and a full suit of armor, it's hard to imagine fighting for 4 minutes. Let alone 4 hours.
Modern reconstruction of weapon efficacy tell us that a muscular man with a gladius can wield more thrusting power, more killing potential than a spear or an arrow or any other ancient handheld weapon or missile.
O tamanho do exército romano era esmagador. Aníbal sofreu perdas terríveis quando as legiões abriram caminho pelo centro. A máquina romana de guerra parecia imbatível.
Hannibal and his men were hanging on by the skin of their teeth. Defeat seemed inevitable, but Hannibal was about to spring his trap. Things were looking desperate for Hannibal as his men were hacked down all around him, and the legions were pounding into his army like a battering ram.
Os romanos sentiam-se a um passo da vitória. Mas estavam cegos para o perigo crescente à sua volta. Ficou claro por que Aníbal adotara a formação crescente. À medida que o avanço romano era sugado para dentro do crescente, os lanceiros líbios nos flancos voltavam-se de ambos os lados para apanhar os romanos em um torno.
People in the very center of this mob couldn't use their weapons. They were pelted by spears, javelins, stones, but they could not reply backwards. It was too compact, it was too tight.
the Romans are a big crowd. It's like people streaming out of a football match. They can't see what's going on.
Naquele momento, a cavalaria de Aníbal dispersou os cavaleiros romanos em ambos os flancos e movimentou-se atrás das legiões. À frente, o ataque romano ficou atolado por causa de sua formação demasiado compacta. Na retaguarda, a cavalaria cartaginesa os bloqueava. A armadilha fechou-se. O vasto exército de Varro e Paulo estava completamente cercado.
Had they kept their wits about them, they could have had an organized breakout and still rescued the battle. So what happened? Fear happened. Emotion happened. Panic. It was a matter of spirit and land and fear and all of those other emotions that explain why one side wins and one side loses.
Os dois comandantes romanos estavam em ação, manobrando destacamentos de cavalaria. Paulo, que nunca quisera esse embate, foi derrubado de seu cavalo.
He sat down on a rock, nursing a head wound. His officers urged him to leave as Hannibal's army was just moments away. He refused, and seconds after they left, died in a hail of javelins. And Varro, who had been so keen for combat, he escaped back to Rome and was forgiven for his defeat.
No matter how unwise Varro's decisions might seem in retrospect, to the Romans at least, they're not going to criticize him because the great trait of all Roman commanders is aggression. You gotta remember that at Cannae, what happened should not have happened. Military strategists could not envision that a numerically inferior army could surround in a concentric manner on both sides a numerically superior force. So the very idea that someone like Hannibal could pull that off was just audacious and should not have happened.
By nightfall, Cannae was a field of blood and tangled limbs. The actual fighting had only taken 4 hours, but nearly 50,000 Romans and 10,000 Carthaginians were slaughtered. That's roughly 200 men each passing minute. Nearly 1/3 of all Roman senators, the men who governed Rome, lay slain or captured. This was the worst defeat ever suffered by Rome.
Cannae seems almost the perfect victory. A smaller but much better army takes on a very big, very strong opponent, and on an open plain, there's no ambush, there's no surprise. Hannibal, just by using his own skill and the quality of his men, overcomes this greater army, and doesn't just overcome it, he virtually destroys it.
Notícias da derrota aterrorizaram Roma. A cidade estava agora à mercê de Aníbal.
But he refused to march on it. His generals just couldn't understand. The way was now open. Why not finish off the Romans once and for all?
The answer may simply be, in part, exhaustion. Hannibal's fought the hardest battle of his life. He's lost a lot of his friends. He's lost a big chunk of his army. But even more importantly than that, marching straight on Rome would have been a big gamble. He didn't have the sort of army that could have coped with besieging Rome, starving it into submission or directly assaulting it. He didn't have the force to do that.
Instead, Hannibal led his army around Italy for the next 14 years. Too weak to conquer Rome, too strong to be defeated in battle. He'd struck 3 hammer blows to the heart of Rome, and still she had not fallen. Her revenge would be terrible.
Exército romano revitalizado atacou Cartago. Aníbal foi chamado para organizar a defesa, mas foi derrotado em Zama, no norte da África. Ele foi forçado a exilar-se.
But still Rome pursued him. Finally, in what is now Turkey, he took his own life, poisoning himself to avoid Rome's assassins.
Aníbal tinha 63 anos. Roma achou que estava livre dele para sempre, mas ele sobreviveu na lenda.
Hannibal was one of the great boogeymen of the Romans. Nurses for centuries after used to say, Hannibal will get you, to frighten the children.
It's a figure that enters deep into the Roman psyche, the big bad wolf type of thing. Hannibal is there. Hannibal is someone who almost appears like an elemental force, who bursts across the Alps, scatters Roman armies to all sides, and takes Rome to the very brink.
Hannibal had kept his oath to his father and his gods, but in failing to destroy Rome, he succeeded in making it stronger. The Romans learned a bitter lesson and reorganized their armies. Within 50 years of Hannibal's death, they would wipe Carthage from the map, plow up the ground on which it stood, and sow the earth with salt. But they could not wipe out the memory of Cannae. Hannibal had written that in Roman blood.